One of the most sought after effects of a profound psychedelic experience is ego death. I see it all the time in my comments, and I myself used to be in pursuit of the very same experience. However, an ego death isn't exactly what you might expect. It can be very disorienting and frightening even, at least it was for me. So let's break down what exactly we're talking about when we say ego death, and then I'll give you a brief summary of what I experienced about 2 years ago. Your ego is your sense of self. I know in a more popular discourse, we say that somebody has an ego if they're very full of themselves and prideful. However, this is more indicative of egomania, as all of us possess an ego. If I were to ask you to describe yourself in 3 words, those words are, well, your ego. It is everything you are, and more importantly, it's everything that you aren't. Simply put, your ego is your identity. It is very important to you, and it is the thing that causes feelings of anger or even resentment when someone makes disparaging remarks about some idea that your identity or your ego has clung on to. Moving on then to ego death, this is when your ego is completely demolished. Suddenly and without any pause for how you are going to react, everything that you consider to be you dissolves. All of these ideas that you used to hold on to so dearly are no longer relevant. You're not a Republican, you're not a Democrat, you're not a Christian, you're not an atheist, you're not white, you're not black, and you're not a woman or a man. If you were to take a list full of everything that you consider to be you and then burn that list, this is what you're experiencing. When you're not prepared to go through ego death, it can be very shocking to say the least. Insightful, no doubt, but scary. Ego death gets its name because you die, or at least the idea of you dies. Written above the entryway to St. Paul's Monastery are the words, "If you die before you die, you won't die when you die." Admittedly, this is a bit convoluted, but here's what they're getting at. To experience complete dissolution of the self is to experience death. And if you can go into physical death with an understanding of what that means, perhaps you will welcome it as an old friend instead of fearing it as a monster. I experienced my own ego death some years ago, and I remember it vividly, which is rare for psychedelic experiences. You don't often get to come back with such a seared-in memory of what you saw. But as with anything particularly intense, that emotion of fear that I felt is what seared this memory in place for me. So our mushroom trip began as normal. We each took a couple grams, and I admittedly took a few more than she did. But once we were done, we headed out to the park for a nice mushroom walk. After our walk was over, we headed home, got cozy on the couch, and I was expecting my mushroom trip to subside gradually as normal. Unfortunately, this would not be the case, as I made the mistake of encouraging her to play Life After Death on Netflix, which, if you haven't seen it, is phenomenal. Just don't watch it while you're tripping. Well, after the very first episode, I experienced this cold wash over me, and I zoned out into the ceiling above, completely mesmerized by its pattern. After some time, the ceiling materialized into this sort of upside-down pool of water that had a single drop released into it. The resulting upstream, or I guess you could say downstream, from that drop would release my consciousness back into my body, even with an accompanying sound. After this, I was convinced that I had died, that we both had died, in fact, in a car accident on our way to the park. This body that I was now inhabiting was not my own. These memories that I claimed to have were not the memories that I used to have. I spent a good 2 to 3 hours confused, frightened, and constantly asking her for validation that I was fine and she was fine, trying to ground myself. Eventually, I did come to, however, on the floor of our living room, rambling about the experience that I had just gone through. After this experience, I came away with a new understanding of myself and what that statement even means. I also had made the comment that I no longer carried feelings of depression. Now, whether or not I was referring to the intense fear and depression that I was experiencing on the trip, there were definitely things that I went into that experience with that I no longer carry with me. But that's ego death. I hope you learned something from this, and if you want me to go into any more detail or talk on another subject, that's what the comments were for. I will see you in the next one. Peace.